Welcome to Doing the Work, a Naples Integrated Recovery podcast. My name is Brian, and this space is for anyone who's tired of surviving the same emotional and behavioral loops, whether that's anxiety, trauma, addiction, or problems in your relationships. Around here, we cut the surface level advice and sugarcoating, no platitudes or bumper sticker wisdom. We focus on clarity, responsibility, emotional discipline, and the courage to look at yourself honestly so that you can stop repeating old patterns and start living with intention instead of reaction. Let's get into it. Hey gang, today I wanted to talk about the neuroscience of safety because I get a lot of clients that come in who want to understand themselves better or understand their patterns better and still feel stuck reacting in ways that they don't really understand, don't like, or can't seem to stop. They read the books, they listen to podcasts, they can explain a pattern with accuracy, but then they find themselves getting snappy with their partner or shutting down mid-conflict, maybe even avoiding intimacy or feeling chronically on edge anyway. And often it isn't that they are missing insight. In fact, I have a handful of clients that over-intellectualize. In fact, I'm sure I am guilty of this when I meet my therapist, who finds me talking to him like we're therapist to therapist instead of him being the therapist and me being the client and me over-intellectualizing myself. So, it isn't that many of them are missing insight, it is an accurate model of how behavior actually gets generated under stress. Many people operate with a system that goes something like this. I perceive something, I think about it, I feel something, and then I act. And that narrative flatters our sense of agency, but sometimes it can be backwards. Because what actually happens, especially in a moment of conflict or threat or strain in your relationship, is that the body shifts state first, and then behavior follows, meaning gets layered on after the fact. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about Polyvagal Theory because it gives us vocabulary to talk about the sequencing without it turning into either moral judgment or emotional absolution, and it will help explain why people do things that they later regret without pretending that those behaviors are harmless or inevitable. So today I am not going to give you diaphragmatic breathing, here's how you calm yourself down, but more to help you understand what your nervous system is organizing you to do before you have even had a choice to think about anything. For a long time, the autonomic nervous system was taught a simple two-part model. Sympathetic meant fight or flight, parasympathetic meant rest and digest. One was framed as the problem when it's overreactive, and the other was framed as the solution when it kicks in. But this model misses something critical. And what Dr. Stephen Porges articulated is that there isn't just one parasympathetic system doing one thing. There are multiple neural circuits. Each has different evolutionary histories and they do different jobs. So some of them support connection, play, curiosity, and reciprocity, while others are more geared toward shutdown, collapse, and immobilization under life threat. Those systems don't turn on because you have decided consciously that you are going to use them. Instead, they turn on because your nervous system detects cues of safety or danger automatically. And Porges calls this neuroception. Neuroception is not the same thing as perception, so it does not require awareness. It doesn't ask for your permission. It just evaluates the environment and immediately shifts your physiology before your conscious thought even comes online. And this matters because a lot of people are trying to think their way out or reason their way out of reactions that aren't even being produced by reasoning in the first place. Now, many of you are familiar with fight or flight, and that is the sympathetic mobilization system. That's where your heart rate increases, your muscles tense, your attention narrows, and your energy is getting recruited to act. Now, often people are breathing quickly when they are in conflict, thinking that that's going to calm them down, but it's all of that inhaling in that they're actually mobilizing their system for defense mode to fight. And what gets overlooked is the other defense system, which is your immobilization response. This is not failure of fight or flight. It's a completely different strategy altogether. And it is posited by Porges that this is an older and more primitive system that shows up when the nervous system evaluates mobilization will not work. In immobilization, meaning the stopping, your body is conserving energy. Your blood pressure drops, your breathing becomes shallow, and sometimes with this, people can dissociate, they can go numb, feel unreal, or collapse internally while remaining outwardly functional. And this is not a choice, it's a reflexive response that's shared with old vertebrate survival systems. When Porges started teaching polyvagal theory, trauma therapists recognized this nearly immediately because polyvagal theory introduced something that they were already seeing clinically: people freezing, dissociating, and shutting down in situations where observers would have expected them to either fight or escape. Now, there is a cultural mistake where we treat these different states like they are either character flaws or that someone is missing skills or that it's a failure of will. But the clinical mistake is that we are treating them purely as emotional experiences. These are physiological state shifts that have behavioral consequences. One of the most uncomfortable implications of this framework is that people are unaware of the triggers that are putting them into these states. So they don't even know what the system has detected. They just know what their body does afterward. And the mind does what it's good at. It fills in the blanks. It creates narrative. So if you want, go back to one of the beginning podcasts where I talked about lizard brain and second arrow, because that's part of all of this. If you feel restless, keyed up, irritated, you might decide that the room is annoying, the person that you're with is the problem, or the conversation needs to end. And if you feel shut down or foggy, you might conclude that you're bored or uninterested or disconnected. And those explanations aren't maybe necessarily wrong, but they are also potentially explanations that are layered on top of a physiological shift that already happened for reasons that you didn't even consciously register. And some of those might include sound sensitivity, facial expression, vocal tone of the other person, temperature, proximity. All of those are things that can shift a state without there even being a conscious thought that's online. The danger here is not ignorance, it's certainty. Because when people become convinced that their narrative explains the behavior fully, then they stop questioning whether the reaction itself might be state-driven instead of situation-driven. I'm going to point us towards relationships with all of that. This is not meant to be abstract neuroscience. Hopefully, probably 9 minutes in now, I've lost a third of the audience, I'm sure. This is why people escalate in arguments, go flat in a conversation that doesn't matter, or might say, I can't even hear what you're saying right now, and they mean it literally. Because when the nervous system shifts into defense, the muscles of the face change. vocal tone changes, middle ear muscles adjust, and people lose the ability to process human speech clearly, and they start hearing threat-relevant frequencies instead. At that point, continuing to argue content is completely pointless because the system is offline and it's not even available for it. I'm going to give you a concrete example. So, if you have ever lived with a dog, then you probably understand more about the nervous system than most psychology textbooks will give you. A dog obviously does not understand language the same way that humans do. They don't track syntax. They don't parse meaning. So you could say good dog in a very cold, flat, irritated, or angry tone and watch that dog cower, shrink, lower her head, tuck the tail, and then you could say something totally hostile, maybe even really nasty and mean. But if you said it in a really warm, playful, musical voice, the dog would just light up, wag tail, approach, and soften. Same words, different response. So, the dog is not responding to the content of what's being said. Instead, the dog is responding to the tone, rhythm, and vocal texture. The dog's responding to whether or not your voice is carrying cues of threat or safety. And that response happens instantly, without thinking, without interpretation, without choice. Sometimes my pit bull will get into something that she shouldn't, like the bathroom trash, or she loves eating these cork coasters that I have. And I don't even need to say anything. If I just go into the room where the cork coaster is destroyed or where the trash has been gone through, and I just look at her and she just sees my face, which I have a lot of my dad's nasty facial expressions before I even become aware of them, and then she shrinks. The face says it all. So this is the part that people miss. Human beings are wired the exact same way. We like to think that because we have language, that people are going to respond to meaning, but under stress, especially relational stress, the nervous system is not leading with meaning. It leads with sound, facial movement, posture, and micro cues that signal whether or not the other person is safe to be with. This wiring does not disappear with evolved speech. It sits underneath all of it. So if someone raises their voice, flattens their face, tightens their jaw, or delivers it in a low, monotone way, the nervous system is not waiting to interpret the sentence. It's already reacting, mobilizing, shutting down before the words even come out. So that is mammalian biology doing exactly what it's evolved to do. So this is why in conflict, you may hear someone say something like, "I didn't even hear anything you said," and it's because they literally cannot process what is being said. Their nervous system has shifted into threat mode, scanning for threat, scanning for meaning, just like the dog. And once you see that, the old framing starts to fall apart, because the problem isn't people being too emotional or too reactive, but instead that many of us have been taught that our nervous system has only two gears, on or off, ignoring the layer where safety, voice, and connection actually lives. Another perfect example of this was a couple that I was recently working with, where they were practicing the words perfectly. They were delivering it textbook, but I had to pause them and say, "You're doing a great job with the words that you are saying, but as a neutral third person observing this argument, I'm going to make you aware that your face is saying the opposite." And as I said that, the partner was nodding. So very much, you could be saying the right thing, but if your body is not matching that, and you've got nasty face or mean face or nasty tone, you're not being perceived as a safe person in that moment or a safe conversation. So I'm going to move into how the vagus nerve actually works, why facial expression, voice, breathing, and posture matter more than the words in the conflict, and how co-regulation either restores safety or escalates threat without anyone even intending to do that. So not about becoming calmer, but about becoming more accurate of what system is running the show. The vagus nerve is a massive communication highway. Roughly 80% of its fibers are sensory, not motor. This means most of what it does is carry information from the body to the brain, not the other way around. It's a surveillance system that's constantly reporting on the state of your organs, your breath, your heart, and your visceral environment. There are two major vagal pathways that matter here. One is older, unmyelinated, and heavily involved in immobilization and shutdown, particularly underneath and below your diaphragm. The other is newer, myelinated, and it is tied to the muscles of your face, your head, inner ear, and your vocal apparatus. That newer circuit is what makes social engagement possible. This distinction matters because the parasympathetic nervous system, the one that's turning off that fire alarm response, isn't always doing the same job. It can support connection, regulation, and health, or it could be recruited for defense. Which one you get depends on the state of the nervous system. Here's why facial expression and voice matters more than the content of what's being said. The newer vagal circuit is wired into facial muscles, your voice, and your middle ear regulation. That means that your nervous system is constantly broadcasting its state through your face and through your voice, and also constantly reading the same signals in other people. So if someone feels safe, then your face is animated, the eyes are expressive, your vocal tone has some variation. Middle ear muscles are tuned to the frequency range of human speech, making it easier to hear nuance and meaning. If someone shifts into a mobilization or fear, all of those systems change. Facial expressions flatten, your vocal tone drops or sharpens, and middle ear regulation shifts away from speech frequencies toward low frequency sounds that are associated with threat and movement. At some point, people aren't just dysregulated, they are literally less capable of processing what is being said to them. This is why arguments can escalate even if both people insist that they are just trying to explain themselves clearly. Their nervous system is not prioritizing comprehension. At the moment, it is prioritizing threat detection. So, if someone says, "I can't even hear what you're saying right now," it often is dismissed like it's sarcasm or avoidance, but neurophysiologically, this is probably very accurate, because when the system is shifted into defense mode, then the neural tone in the middle ear muscles change. They reduce sensitivity to the frequency of human voice, and what comes through instead are just the low frequency sounds that historically signaled that there is danger. And this is why yelling rarely works. It pushes the voice further into a frequency range that's associated with threat. The louder and flatter that a tone gets, the less accessible the listener becomes. And at that point, continuing to talk is not communication, it's just noise. Humans did not evolve to regulate by themselves. Mammals survive through co-regulation. And what that is the ability of one nervous system to help stabilize another through proximity, facial expression, voice, and rhythm. And that is not just like empathy or sentiment, it's biology. This is a core component of trauma work that I do with clients. Infants regulate through their caregivers, and adults also regulate through their partners, friends, and social contacts. If co-regulation breaks down, people don't only feel lonely, but their physiology shifts into defense mode. This is why isolation can feel destabilizing even if people insist that they are fine. Their system is not designed to maintain long-term safety without any relational input. In relationships, this is especially important because if two people lose the ability to co-regulate each other, then conflict stops being about the issue at hand and it instead becomes threat negotiation between two nervous systems. A common mistake is assuming that mutual intensity is connection. It isn't. Escalation is not co-regulation, it's mutual dysregulation. Two systems that are amplifying threat cues towards each other isn't going anywhere. And you'll see that in posture, breath, hand tension, like clenching their fists, pacing. People start extending their inhalations. So the in breath leads to that tightening of muscles and preparing for action. So people think that they are doing that to regulate, but what they're really doing is they're getting themselves prepped for conflict. Their digestion shuts down, their blood flow shifts. And the body is reallocating resources away from anything that is non-essential for survival. At this point, asking someone to talk it through is like asking them to digest a meal while they are sprinting as fast as they can. Breathing is really critical here. It isn't calming because it's soothing. It's because it mechanically influences the vagal tone. The newer vagus nerve acts like a brake on your body's fight or flight response. When the brake is working well, it keeps the body from becoming overly revved up or reactive. That brake gets stronger when you breathe out slowly and for longer, and it gets weaker if you're breathing in longer or more forcefully. So it's the long exhale that helps calm the body. A longer inhale prepares the body to mobilize. So again, inhale sharply is for mobilizing, exhale slowly for calming. And this is why singing, extended speech, and vocalization can shift state. They mechanically lengthen exhalation while engaging the social engagement system at the same time. Now, insight alone does not fix this. So knowing all of this, I let clients know, I normalize this by saying, I teach this all the time and find difficulty applying it in the middle of a heightened state with my partner if there is any kind of a disagreement. You can understand polyvagal theory perfectly and still end up getting kind of snappy with your partner or freezing while you're public speaking or shutting down during intimacy, which doesn't mean that knowledge is useless. It means that your system has shifted first. Where knowledge does matter is after the shift, because it determines whether you justify the behavior, escalate it, or take responsibility for doing a better job of regulating before acting. Many people get in trouble not because their nervous system shifted, but because they built a story that excused what they did next. So I'm going to move into application of this knowledge with no coddling, how to work with these mechanisms without them ever becoming excuses, and how responsibility is part of all of this picture. Sometimes people will lean into the physiology as an excuse, like, I did it because I was activated, or my body made me do it. Or others might lean toward, you need to have better communication skills. And I would say that both are wrong, because the nervous system is not your fault. Your behavior after it shifts, though, is your responsibility, and that's what really matters. Polyvagal theory is not saying that reactions are justified, it's saying that they are predictable, and there is a difference. If your system shifts into defense mode, then you lose access to being curious, you lose access to reciprocity, being able to live with nuance, and reading into language. This is just like basic mammalian biology. But what you do after that shift, whether that's if you escalate, withdraw, punish, justify, or make repair, that's where agency really lives, because most relational damage doesn't happen at the moment of dysregulation. It happens in the story that we tell ourselves afterward. That could sound like, I was angry because you did blank, or I shut down because that's how I am, that's my defense mechanism, or if you didn't say that, then I wouldn't have done blank. And those stories can feel relieving because they restore a sense of coherence, but they also lock people into a pattern that never changes. Doing the work starts when you stop using an explanation as exoneration for your behavior. This is where a lot of couples and individuals can get stuck, because they're trying to repair using language while their bodies are still broadcasting threat. And if that's the case, the apology is not going to land because the tone is wrong. Reassurance will fail because your facial expression is flat, and clarifications are going to escalate because the listener literally cannot hear the speech frequencies. Repair does not begin with what you say. It begins with whether or not your nervous system has shifted back into a state capable of being received. That means slowing the system before addressing content. It means breathing patterns must change first, and that your posture, eye contact, and voice lead, not the words. Because if the body doesn't feel safe, then no amount of correct language is going to fix the rupture. Someone has to be the one who interrupts this loop, and no, it's not likely to be symmetrical. So one person has to be able to notice and say, we are not regulating each other right now. And one person has to resist the urge to win, explain, or retaliate. One person has to prioritize the nervous system state over the story. This is real leadership. And it's uncomfortable because it means tolerating the sensation of being misunderstood without immediately correcting it. It means taking a moment to choose regulation over vindication or winning. And most people are not avoiding repair because they don't know how to. It's because it feels unfair. Regulation does not mean tolerating harm. Polyvagal theory is not asking you to stay in an unsafe relationship, to override your limits, or to soothe someone who is repeatedly violating you. But what it does is it explains why certain interactions feel unsafe, not that you should endure them indefinitely. A regulated boundary is still a boundary. So you can say no with a steady voice, you can disengage from something without contempt, and you can step back without disappearing. None of those are bypassing conflict. They are instead refusing to let dysregulation run that interaction. Doing the work means that you start becoming aware and tracking patterns, not moments. You notice when your face flattens. You become aware of your breath. You notice when arguments repeat with the different content but identical physiology. And instead of asking who is right, instead you start asking which state am I in right now and what does this state tend to do? Because that question alone will change the outcome. If you can name the state, then you can also delay action. And delay is often enough to prevent damage. So let's make this concrete. 1, your state precedes your story. Your nervous system shifts before the narrative ever forms. 2nd, loss of access is not loss of responsibility. You're not choosing that shift with your nervous system, but you do choose what you're going to do next. 3rd, repair happens through physiology first, language second. So if safety is not felt, then the words are just hollow, they're not going to land. 4, co-regulation is a biological need, not emotional dependency. Human beings stabilize through others, and pretending otherwise creates pathology. Last, boundaries and regulation are not opposites. You can be regulated and firm at the same time. So I'm going to give you a challenge worth sitting with because it's a part that many people skip. Think about a recurring conflict with a partner or family member, maybe a colleague, or even in yourself. And then ask yourself, what does my body reliably do before an argument starts? What sensations signal that I'm about to lose access to listening or nuance? What story do I usually tell myself to justify what happens next? And if I regulated first with a few of those long exhales, what behavior would I not need to defend against afterward? Don't answer any of these quickly, because if an answer comes fast, it's probably a story. So hopefully from this, it isn't about insight or vocabulary or a better explanation. It is noticing the moment where your nervous system pulls you toward a familiar outcome and then choosing not to obey that automatically. It's pausing when justification feels urgent. It is regulating when escalation feels like it's deserved and noticing that you want to become louder or you want to be understood. It's making a repair without theatrics. And it's setting boundaries without contempt. If you made it this far, thanks for listening. Obviously, all of that does not fit into a TikTok reel or quick Instagram summary. It's not glamorous, it's not righteous, but it is stability. And that is being a safe partner, showing up safely in arguments, and that is doing the work. Thanks for spending the time with me. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with somebody who may need to hear it. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others around you. Remember that we're all doing the best that we can with the tools that we currently have, and we are all capable of growing past them. If you'd like to reach out or connect, send me an email, brian@naplesintegratedrecovery.com. I hope to hear from you there. And in the meantime, thanks again for listening, and I'll see you on the next one.